Thank you. That's good feedback. Now, did you Brenda wants to perhaps just finish off, and can you just answer a little question for me? We had some discussion while you guys were all having your discussions around funding models, so just perhaps Brenda will touch on what they might look like. I just had a question around, if you're going to change all these things, how are we going to be funded for it, really, with my other hat on?
Well, that's not a question I can actually really answer at the moment. Suffice to say that we need to do this work and establish the models of care before the funding work can be done, because without knowing, and there is intended to be some more work on funding, and there are other pieces of work being done. Simon wants to come and talk about funding too. But until we can agree what there is, you can't actually cost it, and if you can't cost it, you can't fund it. So we need some agreement around what things are. A couple of things I wanted to say was, that I'm really value all of the discussion you've had and hope that you take that away, and when you fill out the questionnaires, have these conversations with other people too, because they're questions that we really need to ask in terms of what it would look like, and how we do need to shape it, and as much input as possible is great. And also wanted to just reinforce in asking the questions about volunteers, that's not suggesting for a minute that I don't think volunteers are an absolutely fundamental part of the way we deliver palliative care services, but it's more about the notion of where they fit in the continuum of delivering specialist services, as opposed to a whole lot of roles that volunteers undertake within our palliative care services, which may be incredibly and are incredibly valuable, but are not delivering specialist palliative care. Thank you.
This will be a bit of a prophetic word on the funding. Interestingly, the service specifications around palliative care, which are a wee bit in abeyance at the moment, have led to a focus on service specifications and the way in which New Zealand secondary services are funded at the highest level. So the National Board is actually looking at issues of service delivery and costings, and certainly a recognition in discussing this with Chai Chua, who's the business chair of Health Board, that this is an archaic and rather bizarre system that we work in, and a need for a kind of focus back to look at the kernel of what on earth we're trying to do here with the funding. And probably in terms of tinkering with the funding model, integrated family health centres are going to be probably the key to new funding models, and incentivising general practice teams around good care, which I think will be quite fascinating. Hoping I can get palliative care into that, but this is quite a siloed thing again, and trying to get a Trojan horse into that as well. So service specs will probably resurface in palliative care in 2012, 2013, but a whole lot of stuff may happen in this interim, which is why resource and capability at the sort of high-level framework approach to define is going to be really important. Another key area is going to be our nursing coordination model for the country. That's going to be another key component. So an agreement of roughly what specialist is, what generalist is, what our nursing coordination model is, will put us a long way towards actually framing up what might happen in terms of an overall funding model, and it might revert back to some sort of bulky looking funding model against an integrated service, for example. But prophetic only.
One of the things that in the funding, that UK palliative care funding thing that that came out, just let you know, because I think it's really interesting, is they're looking around packages of care funding, but most specifically what they're looking at is not bulk funding, but activity-based funding, because that is a driver of quality. And so that's one of the key recommendations around that palliative care funding review, is that rather than bulk funding, they're looking at how they fund based on activity. And one of the ways that I think that in terms of looking at it in terms of an example of how funding works in New Zealand, I almost wonder that they're looking, like we have the lead maternity care providers in New Zealand who the funding goes with them and then they determine whether, and it looks like that might be a bit of where they're going to go with that. So that's a completely different funding model to the bulk funding, but it's actually a funding model that we do have experience through the lead maternity carer in New Zealand.
Okay, thank you, Brenda. Now, we do have a few more minutes available for questions before lunch. So, Karen.
I'm just curious, Brenda, how these will either inform or link with or relate to the service specs.
It says on. It is on. The service specifications, as you know, had been under development since about 2005, and it's been a very long process of development of service specifications. This is one of the pieces of work that it was determined that needed to happen before they could be progressed and finalised, because, let's face it, we've spent 10 years debating what generalist and specialist is, and I couldn't tell you how many times I've heard people say to me, we really need to agree, we really need to define what generalist and specialist is. We absolutely do, but this is that activity. This is what we are doing. This is where we will define for the purposes of taking it forward. So it's really important that you contribute to the consultation, because what comes out of this will be the definition of the differentiation between generalist and specialist palliative care. And not everyone will agree with it, and we might even end up with everybody disagreeing with an aspect of it, but we can't move forward until we put a stake in the ground and say, this is what we're talking about, let's name it, and then we can get on with it. And it doesn't mean to say that as we evolve services, because it's definitely an evolution rather than an evolution, that we might not need to review things, but we need to agree something to actually take it forward.
Okay, so the timeline, Brenda, for this piece of work?
Originally it was going to be the end of September. It's increasingly looking like it might be that the consultation will go out, and end of September will be the cut-off point for consultation. So the questionnaire will come out shortly, and there will be a good period of time so that the questionnaire can go out and be well circulated through networks, and people can have an opportunity to discuss it and then feedback.
Right, so is that sometime in the new year then for the final?
The final report needs to be done by the end of the year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then you can have Christmas break. Excellent. Any more questions from the floor?
Very quick question for me. I just wonder why we struggle with the definition. Do other specialist services have the same problem? I'm looking at a gerontologist across the way, and we would be clear what a gerontologist does as a specialist, and yet we all care for older people. And I sort of struggle, why are we different? And we struggle with these definitions, and it's taken so many years.
I just wonder whether we don't struggle more with the special and specialist, to be honest.
Yeah, is it a trait of palliative care that consensus is difficult? I don't know. Right, any more questions? Okay, well, oh, you're pointing at yourself for a question, Kevin, or no? Okay, well, on behalf of everyone, I'd just like to thank Brenda very much for her presentation today. It's a very, very important piece of work, and it's going to be a very challenging piece of work. So good on you, Brenda, for taking it on. And we've just got a little gift for you. Did you want to do anything?
Thanks, Claire. Now, we've just had a little bit of a glitch with lunch where it looked like about 1:10 is the earliest they can get it out for us. So stay in your groups, keep your discussion going, and we'll take lunch a little bit longer at the end there, but I doubt people will be heading off listening to that thunder and lightning out there. So hopefully the food will be out about 1:10, and then we'll regroup about 20 to 2, if that's okay with everyone. Thank you.